Hello and welcome back to our channel. We're excited to bring you a special treat today, a beautiful poem written by Sheikh Hamdan, the Crown Prince of Dubai. The night air was heavy with an oppressive stillness, a palpable weight that pressed down upon everything in its wake. The clock on the wall ticked away with metronomic precision, marking each passing second with a relentlessness that seemed to mock her, reminding her of the painful truth she'd rather avoid. The room, despite the warm glow of the fireplace, felt chilled to the bone, as if the very coldness of her emotions had seeped into the atmosphere itself. She sat perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as if she were physically holding herself together, her fragile composure threatening to shatter at any moment. Her gaze was fixed intently on him, searching for answers, for reasons, for some semblance of understanding in the midst of turmoil. Her eyes bore into his very soul, as if willing him to provide the solace she so desperately craved. He stood near the window, his silhouette framed against the faint, lunar glow that cast an ethereal light upon his features. The moon's gentle beams seemed to accentuate the sharp lines of his face, the angular planes that spoke of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. Yet, despite his imposing presence, there was something vulnerable about him, something that hinted at a deep-seated pain, a sense of longing that echoed her own. The words he had spoken just moments before still lingered in the air, their sharp edges slicing through the delicate fabric of their relationship like a dagger to the heart. The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The words hung in the air like a fragile apology, a desperate attempt to mend the shattered remnants of their trust. She flinched as if the words themselves had the power to wound her, to rip open the fragile scab that had begun to form over her heart. Her eyes flashed with a quiet strength, a steely resolve that belied the trembling of her voice. "How can you stand there and say that?" she asked, her words laced with a poignant vulnerability. "How can you claim it wasn't meant to happen when you let it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, a desperate plea for answers that seemed to echo through every fiber of her being. Her gaze bore into his, searching for a glimmer of truth, a shred of evidence that would explain the inexplicable. But his eyes, once bright with love and adoration, now seemed dull and lifeless, their sparkle extinguished by the weight of his regret. As he turned to face her, the raw emotion in his eyes caught her off guard. The depth of his sorrow, the weight of his regret, was etched across his face like a canvas of pain. He looked as torn and shattered as she felt, and for a moment, they just stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken words. "It wasn't a choice," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "At least, not the kind you think. I didn't plan this. I didn't mean for it to happen." But she cut him off, her voice rising like a crescendo. "You didn't stop it, though. You didn't stop yourself." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a painful reminder of the betrayal she felt. The silence that followed was oppressive, a heavy blanket that suffocated them both. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a silence that carried every unspoken truth, every hidden fear, and every regret they both held. She rose from the couch, her legs trembling beneath her, and took a step closer to him. "You promised me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You promised me that I was enough, that I was your everything." The pain in her chest was suffocating, an ache that felt like it would never end. He reached out to her, his eyes desperate. "I didn't stop loving you," he said, his voice cracking. "Something happened, something I didn't expect." But his words only made her heart sink deeper. She looked away, unable to bear the sight of him. "You stole my heart," she whispered, the tears she had fought so hard to keep at bay finally spilling down her cheeks. "You stole my heart, and now you're telling me it was all a mistake?" The pain and anguish in her voice were palpable, a heartbreaking reminder of the love they had lost. The facade of her composure was crumbling, revealing the anguish that lay beneath. "Was it worth it?" she whispered, her voice a haunting echo of despair. "Was she worth annihilating the very foundation of our existence?" The words hung in the air like a mournful dirge, a lament for what had been lost. He recoiled, his eyes widening as if her words had struck him with the force of a physical blow. "It's not about worth," he protested, his voice trembling like a leaf in an autumn gale. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I didn't plan on. She raised a hand, a fragile barrier against the torrent of his excuses. Just stop, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. I can't bear to listen to you justify the unjustifiable. Her gaze drifted away from him, her eyes fixed on the dark, quiet world outside the window. The night seemed to be mourning the loss of their love, its shadows cast like a pall of sorrow over the landscape. Tears streamed down her face like autumn rain, each drop a poignant reminder of the love they had lost. The silence between them was oppressive, a heavy blanket that suffocated the air from their lungs. In that moment, it seemed as though the very fabric of their relationship had been torn asunder, leaving only tattered remnants of what once was. The memories they had shared, the laughter, the tears, all seemed to be fading into the darkness, lost forever in the abyss of his betrayal. Her face was awash with tears once more, but she let them fall unchecked, a testament to the depth of her sorrow. I loved you, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of emotion. More than life itself, I thought you were my forever, my soulmate, my everything. Her voice cracked as she paused, struggling to contain the anguish that threatened to overwhelm her. Now, she continued, her words laced with a quiet despair, I'm left wondering if I ever truly knew you at all. Her eyes searched his face, seeking answers to the questions that haunted her. He took a tentative step forward, his eyes pleading for understanding. I'm still me, he said, his voice low and urgent. I'm still the man who loves you, who always loved you. But his words rang hollow, a cruel mockery of the love they had once shared. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a sound that was both poignant and heartbreaking. The man who loves me wouldn't have betrayed me like this, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. The man who loves me wouldn't have let someone else capture his heart. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a painful reminder of his transgression. He had no response, no words to salve the wounds he had inflicted. His silence spoke volumes, a deafening admission of his guilt. She shook her head, feeling a fresh wave of tears threaten to spill down her cheeks. The pain was almost too much to bear, a heavy burden that threatened to consume her. I don't know if we can ever find our way back from this, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of despair. The weight of his betrayal had left her shattered, her heart in pieces. He gazed at her, his eyes sunken, his expression a haunting reflection of his own desperation. I don't want to lose you, he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Tell me what I can do to make this right. I'll do anything. His words were a desperate cry, a last-ditch attempt to salvage the wreckage of their relationship. But she knew, deep down, that some wounds cut too deep, that some betrayals were too profound to be healed by promises or apologies. The pain he had inflicted had left scars that would never fully fade, a lingering ache that would haunt her forever. Her heart ached at his words, but she knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, that trust, once shattered, could never be fully restored. This wound feels like it will never stop bleeding, she whispered, her voice shattering like a delicate crystal. You can't fix this, she continued, her words dripping with a sorrow that seemed to echo through every cell of her being. You already broke us. The air between them grew heavier, thick with the weight of unspoken words, unresolved emotions, and shattered dreams. Her words hung in the space like shattered glass, sharp and impossible to piece back together. The fragments of their relationship lay scattered around them, a poignant reminder of what had been lost. He looked at her with a helplessness that only deepened her pain, his eyes filled with a desperation that seemed to scream, what can I do to make this right? For years, she had seen him as her anchor, her rock, the one person she could count on no matter what. He had been her safe haven, her shelter from life's storms. And now, he felt like a stranger, a man wearing the face of the one she loved, but with eyes that seemed to hold a different soul. The disconnect was jarring, a painful reminder that the man she thought she knew was gone, lost forever in the abyss of his own betrayal. She shook her head slowly, her arms still wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to hold together the shattered remnants of her heart. I don't even know where to start, she whispered, her voice raw and ravaged by emotion. You stood in front of me and made vows, she continued, her words spilling out like a torrent of pain. You promised me forever, and now you're standing here, asking me to believe that this wasn't a choice? Her voice rose, incredulous, as she stared at him with eyes that blazed with anger and hurt. It wasn't a choice, he protested, stepping closer, his face etched with desperation. I swear it wasn't. It was a terrible, stupid mistake. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that cut through the air like a knife. A mistake? She repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something you didn't mean in the heat of the moment. This wasn't a mistake. This was a betrayal. Her words struck him like a slap, and she could see the pain etched across his face. But she refused to feel sympathy for him, not now, not after everything. Do you even realize what you've done to me? She demanded, her voice rising as the anger bubbled to the surface. I look at you, and I don't see the man I married anymore. I see someone who lied to me, who broke my trust, who... Her voice caught, and she had to pause, taking a shaky breath to steady herself. Who didn't think I was enough, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. That's not true, he protested, his voice pleading. You were always enough. You are enough. I got lost somewhere along the way. Lost? She repeated, her eyes narrowing. You didn't get lost. You let yourself go down this path. You let her in. You let her take what was mine. He didn't respond, and the silence only fueled her anger further. She clenched her fists at her sides, the emotions coursing through her too much to contain. Do you know what it's like to be blindsided like this? She asked, her voice trembling. To have everything you thought you knew about your life ripped away in an instant? To question every moment, every memory, every word you ever said to me? He took a step forward, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I know I've hurt you, he said softly, his voice breaking. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But please don't let this be the end of us. She stared at him, her chest heaving with the weight of her emotions. You don't get to decide that, she said quietly, her voice firm. You don't get to stand there and ask me to forgive you when you haven't even answered the one question that matters. He frowned, confused. What question? She took a deep breath, the word trembling on her lips. Why? She whispered. Why wasn't I enough? Why did you let this happen? Why? She whispered, the word hanging in the air like a challenge, a plea for understanding. He looked down, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of her questions was crushing him. I don't have an answer, he admitted, his voice barely audible, a faint whisper of despair. I wish I did. I wish I could explain it in a way that would make sense, that would erase the pain and the hurt. But I can't. Her heart sank at his words, the final nail in the coffin of everything they had built together. The fragile threads of their relationship were snapping, one by one, leaving only tatters and tears. She turned away from him, unable to look at him any longer. The pain was too much, the betrayal too deep. I don't know how to move past this, she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. I don't know if I can. The words hung in the air, a poignant reminder of the uncertainty that lay ahead. The future, once bright and promising, now seemed shrouded in doubt and fear. She felt lost and alone, adrift in a sea of pain and heartache. He didn't respond, didn't try to offer any words of comfort or reassurance. He simply stood there, a silent witness to the destruction of their relationship, the devastation of her heart. I hope you've enjoyed this insightful video. If you've appreciated the content I've shared, I invite you to join my community by subscribing to my channel. To stay updated on my latest videos, simply click the bell icon below. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and I look forward to sharing more engaging content with you in the future.